Finance.
Okay, so it's now recording. So if you could make sure you're on mute and I can answer any questions in chat. So we're really, really lucky to have Kat from City University, who's going to go through all things about student finance. And you're on mute.
Good start. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. It's so lovely to virtually see all of you. So as Philippa mentioned, my name's Kat. I work for City University of London. And this evening, we will be talking about student finance. As mentioned, please make sure you keep yourself muted for the duration of the talk. There's quite a lot of information for me to get through. So please type your questions in chat as you have them. And then Philippa will pick those up. So that's the best way for us to get through the content. So in terms of what I'm going to be speaking about this evening, just a few things to bear in mind: that student finance changes are subject to changes in government legislation and things related to that. So the information that I'm going to be giving this evening is as up to date as I can give it currently. Those of you that are planning to start university this September, then these figures should be the figures that will kind of be the ones that you will be working to. But if there are any of you who are planning or may end up taking a gap year for any reason, or it might be that you end up kind of deferring your entry to university, you might not be somebody who is going to university at this stage, then it might be the case that you need to just bear in mind that changes to student finance can happen in future years. And so it kind of might be something that you just need to bear in mind, that if anything changes with the loan system, you will then be eligible to any changes. Okay, so just make sure you keep an eye on the gov.uk website for any changes. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to kind of mute. Just a reminder, if you can remain mute for the duration of this talk, that'd be really helpful. So what is Student Finance England? What are we talking about today? So when you go to university, there are two main costs that you will have to deal with. You've got tuition fees, which is the money that you pay to the university to be a student there. And then you have living costs. So that's things like accommodation for those of you that are going to be moving away from where you live now, potentially into university accommodation or into private rented accommodation. But there's also things like bills, clothes, food, even those of you that potentially live with someone else now, you might still have rent that you need to pay. And so it's all of that kind of stuff that you have to find money for. So all of your living costs. The good news is that for many of you, Student Finance England will have money that's available to help you with both of those things. And what I'm going to be talking about today is the loan system that's available to you. There is some eligibility criteria for student finance. I'm not going to be going through this in huge amounts of detail because most of you on the call will be eligible, but it is really important that if you have a look at the slide that I'm showing here and you think, I'm not sure if I'm eligible, I don't know if I've been in the UK for enough years, do make sure that you get in touch with Student Finance directly. This will be down to them rather than necessarily to individual university decisions. So it's really important that you reach out to Student Finance if you're in any doubt as to whether you will be eligible for student finance. Okay, you can reach out to them by phone and you can easily get their phone number by Googling it. They don't really operate by email because they need to be able to speak to you to talk through your question. They might need to speak to you to get permission to access your account. So phone is the best way to get hold of them. So that's just something to bear in mind. So yeah, do have a look at this, have a look at the gov.uk website if you are in any doubt whether or not you're eligible. But what I will now be talking about for the rest of this is kind of assuming that you are eligible, what you will be able to get. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about is the tuition fee loan. So as I mentioned, when you go to university, you do have to pay money to the university to be a student there. And at the moment, universities in the UK can charge up to £9,250 a year in tuition fees. As if you are eligible for the student loan, then you are eligible for something called a tuition fee loan, which is the portion of the loan that means that you do not have to pay that £9,250 up front. It means that you can borrow the tuition fee loan and this will then get arranged for you on your behalf. So what you do is you tick a box on the student finance application form to say, yes, I would like to apply for the tuition fee loan. And then Student Finance England will transfer that money to the university on your behalf. And so it won't bypass your account. They'll arrange it directly with the university for you. Now, it is a loan, so it is borrowed money that you'll have to pay back later. And we will talk about repayments in a few slides' time. But I just want to make sure you're aware at this point that this is a big part of the money that you pay back when you finish university. You will see that when we talk about the living cost element of student finance, that it is often based on your household income or kind of things related to that. But for the tuition fee loan, it isn't based on that. So the tuition fee loan is not based on your household income or really linked to your individual circumstances. As long as you are eligible for the loan from Student Finance England, then you should be eligible for the tuition fee loan. So that's the first bit. Then the second bit is the slightly more complicated bit, which is where we talk about the maintenance loan. So maintenance is the word that Student Finance England use to mean living costs. So as I mentioned earlier, this could be accommodation, it could be rent you pay now, it could be your mortgage, bills, clothes, food, anything that you have that is a living expense, all of that comes under the maintenance loan. So this is money that is paid to you to support you financially through your studies. This is much more individual for each person. Everyone on this call is going to be entitled to a slightly different amount because it's based on your individual circumstances, but I will talk through what that looks like over the next few slides. Whatever the amount is that you are entitled to, you're entitled to roughly the same amount per year, and it's divided into 3 installments per year. So you get some in September, some in January, and some in April. So those of you who are quite keen on budgeting, that's something for you to have a think about is, okay, I need to make this money last for like a certain number of weeks or 3-month period. How am I going to do that? So hopefully you can kind of start planning for that. So this is also a loan as well. So you can see it's got the word learn in the title. The tuition fee loan and the maintenance loan are what you will repay once you graduate, but we will talk about repayments in a few slides. So as mentioned, the maintenance loan is dependent on your individual circumstances, and this will vary depending on what your situation is. So if you are under 25, then it is usually based on the income of your parents. If your parents live together, it's based on their joint income. If you live with one parent, it's based on that parent's income, so the parent that you live with. But if the parent that you live with has a partner that lives with them, so for example, you live with mum and stepdad or mum and mum's boyfriend, then their income is taken into consideration as well, whether they financially support you or not. Okay, so that is just something to bear in mind. So that's for those of you that are in that kind of under 25 category. For those of you that are over 25, then it will be based on the income of your partner if you live with them. Okay, now there are some criteria for those of you, particularly in the under 25 category, that might mean that student finance don't look at some other criteria. This can potentially be related to if you have any children, if you have been in care. So there are certain criteria that come into play here. The Student Finance England website is very helpful. When you go through the application process, it will ask you a number of questions about your individual circumstances, which will mean that you are then given the right amount of maintenance loan based on your individual circumstances. So the application form does take you through this. There is also something called a student finance calculator on their website where you can put in some of your situation as it is now, depending on your age and who you live with. And Student Finance England will give you an idea of how much maintenance loan you're entitled to. So I would really recommend that you go and have a look at that, because it's very difficult for me today to talk about every single person's individual circumstance, because, you know, it is specific to you. So if you have a look at this and there's any part of you that kind of thinks you're not sure, then do have a look at that student finance calculator and the guidance on their website. One thing I just want to address here, particularly for those of you that are over 25, is Student Finance England don't particularly look at your income. Because you will be a student while you're at university. Things are not really based on what you will be earning, even if you will be working while you're at university. Many of you will have part-time or potentially full-time jobs alongside your degree, but your income is not kind of what they're looking at. It's the people around you, because you will be the student that's there. There are also things, particularly for those of you with children, related to things like benefits you receive and things like that. Often those benefits are not taken into account, particularly if they're related to your child, but do make sure that you have a look. Sarah, the website is gov.uk/student finance. If you Google Student Finance England, it should come up. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at roughly sort of how much living costs it might look at based on where you will be living while you're studying as well. So those of you who are going to be living in your parental home, so this kind of under 25s, those of you who are going to be living with parents while you are studying, it's up to 8171 that's available, and this is roughly the same amount per year. Those of you in the elsewhere category, so that is usually the over 25s, or those of you who are moving away to university, but you're under 25, but you're kind of leaving your parental home, it's up to 9706. And then those of you who are going to be moving away from your parental home but living at a university in London. So I know that's a bit confusing when you're probably based in London now, but let's say that you were going to City, where I work, and living in City accommodation, or you were living in private accommodation outside of your parental home, then it's up to 12,667. Again, particularly as we've got a lot of learners on the call who are adult learners, your situation is different depending on your children. I really would recommend you have a look at the Student Finance Calculator. The URL for this is on the slide currently. But again, if you just Google Student Finance Calculator, it will come up. Pat, this is a good question. You don't have to take the maintenance loan if you don't want to. The same as you don't have to take the tuition fee loan either. It's completely up to you whether or not you want to take the loan out. Many students do. A huge proportion of UK students do take the full loan out. But if you are in a position that you don't need to and you can reduce your debt, then there is absolutely no obligation for you to do that. You also don't need to take the full amount you're entitled to. So if you happen to be eligible for the 12,667, then you don't necessarily have to take that out. So that's up to you. You can also decide later in year 2 or year 3. So if you decide you don't want it in year 1, but do want to apply for it in year 2 and year 3, you can do that because you reapply for student finance every year. There is also going to be some additional amounts on top of what I'm showing on the table here. For those of you that do have children, there may be additional amounts that you get in addition to this table. So again, the student finance calculator is helpful for you. But this table should at least give you a rough idea of kind of somewhere around the figures that you will be entitled to. So think about who your household income is. That might be your parents, that might be your partner. And then you can see that as the household income goes up, the amount of loan you get goes down. The reason that is calculated like that is because Student Finance England assume that the other person that it's based on will make up the difference. That isn't necessarily the actual practical case for everybody, but that is kind of how it's calculated. Many of you will work part-time alongside your degree. And as I mentioned earlier, that doesn't impact the amount of loan that you get. So you can work part-time to boost up the money that you have. Some of you may also access other things, and I'll talk about student bank accounts a bit later on in my talk. But hopefully this gives you a bit of a rough idea. There is a bold number on each part of the table. The bold number means that it doesn't get broken down any further than that. So for example, if your household income is £80,000 and over, and you're in the home category, then it would still be that you get 3,597. So everyone is entitled to some maintenance loan. It's just if your household income falls somewhere on the table, then you'd be entitled to a bit more. Hopefully that gives a bit of an indicator. As I said, it is individual for each person. Do have a look on the calculator, but I hope this helps a bit. So let's now have a look at the extra support that's available as well. So extra support comes from a few different places. The first one is from universities. So bursaries is usually linked to personal circumstances. This can often be things like household income. It could be based on your postcode. It could be related to things like that. So every university will be slightly different in terms of the bursaries and scholarships that they offer. Scholarships are usually linked to academic excellence, so things like grades. It could be music scholarships, it can be sports scholarships. Many of you will be aware what scholarships and bursaries your university offers, but if you don't, do have a look on their websites and see what they have. I'm not saying you should decide which of the 5 universities you applied to you would end up at based on a scholarship, but I think it's useful information for you to know if you don't know it already. Often you will be considered for these automatically because on the student finance application, it asks if you want to share your application form with your university. I would recommend you do that as long as you're happy to share, because it means that they will, where possible, consider you for scholarships and bursaries automatically. But some universities do have application forms. So for example, at City, we have a very big scholarship that is like half of your tuition fees are paid for you by City. And so we do need a separate application form, which has a personal statement that you have to write. So it's worth kind of having a look on the university's websites to see what you need to do individually based on your circumstances. There's then some additional support that comes from Student Finance England. And I'm not going to talk about these in huge detail, but I will briefly talk about what they are. So the Disabled Students Allowance, or DSA for short, is for those of you who maybe have long-term health conditions, mental health conditions, learning disabilities, etc. And it's there to pay for things you need as a result of those things. So this could involve, and again, it's very independent for each person, but it could be things like adaptations to accommodation, particular software. You might need particular support that is put in place by the university. So if you think you meet the criteria I would apply for it. It's just an extension of the main application form. You will have to provide some evidence, but Student Finance England may be able to then pay for some support for your studies. It's not really an additional income. It pays for kind of particular services or adaptations and things. But if you are not able to get funding from Student Finance England, you might be able to get funding through the university. So they might have different criteria. So if you think you're eligible, I recommend applying, because the best case scenario is that you will get free money, but it's paying for services or laptops or things like that, which is there to aid your studies. The worst is that you won't get it. So I would recommend applying if you're eligible. Then the next three, so the parent learning allowance and the childcare grant, are linked to those of you that have children. There is some extra support there. The parent learning allowance means you get some additional funding because you're going to university while having a child or children. And the childcare grant is to support specifically with childcare costs. And then the adult dependence grant is to do with if you have an adult who financially depends on you while you're studying. Have a look at the Student Finance website for more information on these. What will happen as part of the main application, it all happens in the same website. So you will be asked, like, do you have children? And then it opens up this part of the application form for you. So the Student Finance website does support you in terms of applying for everything you're eligible for. There is also some additional funding. I'm not going to be talking about medicine and dentistry today because we don't offer that at City. But also, if you've applied for that programme, you know what NHS funding you're entitled to, I would expect. And if not, it will be made very clear on the university websites that you have applied to. But there will, I'm sure, be many of you on the call who have applied for courses like nursing, midwifery, radiography. There is some additional funding for students in those healthcare subjects, which is known as the NHS Learning Support Grant. This is like a £5,000 grant and potentially more for those of you who have children or dependents, which is a non-repayable grant, which is there to support you with your finances while you're studying a healthcare programme. I've included a link here so that you can have a look at that, and the universities that you apply to will provide some more information for you, because this is a separate application from your main student finance one. So how do you apply for the main student finance loan? It's an online application form at gov.uk/student finance. It will open in March and then it will close somewhere around the 21st, 22nd of May, something like that. It will be made clear once it goes live what the deadline is. Please, please, please make sure that you apply on time. You may not know for sure during that window which university is going to be your top choice. That's absolutely fine. Put the university you hope will be your top choice, and then you can amend it really easily on the student finance application if that university changes, even if that university changes in clearing. Okay, so I really recommend applying within the window. You can even apply, and then if you actually decide in September you're not going to be going to university for whatever reason, you can cancel your application. But it means that your original application form was in on time. It means you're guaranteed to have your funding in place for the start of your program. So I would really, really recommend it. Those of you who are applying as part of a dependent, so if you have a parent, it's based on their income or it's based on your partner's income, then you will need to have them fill out part of their section, because they will need to put their income so that you can be assessed against it. So I would recommend as soon as it's open, you put in your application form, you then put in their email addresses and they will get sent an email to link their application to yours. They need to submit their bit by that deadline as well. So the earlier you do this, the sooner it's in and the sooner you can not worry about it. You will also need to send in some documentation and things like that. So the sooner that you do all of this, the sooner you can get everything sorted, and then you can go back to focusing on finishing your studies. Okay. So students, in terms of the information that you will need to provide, you will need to prove your identity. If you have a UK passport, and the easiest way to do this is using your UK passport, because you don't have to send it in. You just type the details into the Student Finance website and they can verify it. If you were not born in the UK, they may not be able to do that. But again, the system will talk you through that. And those of you who are here in the UK not using a UK passport, whether that's because you just don't have one, but you were born here and you're here using your birth certificate, or whether you were not born in the UK and you've moved here and maybe you're here on some kind of visa or some kind of other passport from another country, it may be that Student Finance will need you to send in some of your documentation. They will tell you exactly what they need from you. So just make sure that you kind of follow what they need. Make sure that if you're sending any documents, you send it recorded delivery, because obviously these are expensive and important documents to you. So make sure that you are careful with that if they require you to send anything in. It may also be beneficial for you to include an envelope in there with your address on it that has prepaid recorded delivery to make sure that your documents get back to you safely. You will obviously need to put in the university and course details for the university you hope is your top choice, and then you can change that if that changes for any reason. You'll need to give your bank account details for your loan to be paid into. You can amend that if you change bank accounts before you start your course. You'll need to give your national insurance number, and then you will need to give the email addresses of your household. So whether that's parents or partners, the people that the assessment is based on. Parents, partners, there are certain things you will need to provide as well. So you will basically, what they're asking from you is related to your income, and that income is from the previous complete tax year. So that is not this coming April. It's not April 2022 because we haven't got there yet. So it will be based on April 2021. So likely the income you will need to provide is your P60 or your March wage slip. The Student Finance website has really, really improved in recent years, and it's much clearer in terms of what information they need you to provide. So do just follow that because it will support you in terms of what information you need to give. You may also need to give details of other taxable income. Some benefits count in this, some do not. And again, there is a lot of helpful information on the Student Finance website about this, and they get you to like keep checking it. So that's something to bear in mind. Something I want to touch on here, because this is often a question I get asked, is, well, what if my income has dropped since the last complete tax year? So maybe I was earning £60,000 last year, but now I've retired and I don't have an income like that. You need to put in the application based on the information they ask for, so based on the last complete tax year, and then you can do something called a current year reassessment form. So what that is you are then putting in what your current income is. And so Student Finance England will then reassess based on the current income, but you have to have put in the original one first. I hope that makes sense, but again, there is lots of support on the Student Finance website. Okay, so that's all the stuff related to applications. Now let's have a look at repayments. So as I mentioned earlier, the tuition fee loan and the maintenance loan get combined to be the money that you will repay after you graduate. The really important thing to kind of get your head round when it comes to repayments is that the amount that you repay is based on your salary and not how big your loan is. So it doesn't matter if you only took out the tuition fee loan for 3 years, or you took out the tuition fee loan for 3 years and you had the full London maintenance loan, so your loan was much bigger than someone who just had the tuition fee loan. The amount you repay is based on your salary. The reason that Student Finance England and the government have arranged it this way is that this makes the repayments fair based on how much you will be earning. Okay, so that's a really important thing to understand, because there is a lot of kind of potentially sort of miscommunications about how the student loan works, but it's based on the salary and not how big your loan is. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Now, I will say this is what the current system is like. These are what the current figures are, but do make sure you keep an eye on the gov.uk website in case there are any changes. But the current system is that you won't make any repayments until you graduate. So while you're studying, you're focused on your studies, you're not thinking about repayments. When you graduate, you usually finish a degree in July, and then you don't have to start repayments until the April after you graduate. So there's a bit of window of time for you to just get settled into the working world. And then you will make repayments once your income goes above £26,575 a year. So until your income goes above that threshold, you won't be making repayments. That's the threshold that Student Finance have decided is when you should start making repayments. And then once you reach that figure, the repayments are based on what you earn above 26,575. So I've got a table here which gives an example of this. So if your income is £30,000 a year, they will only actually calculate your repayments based on what you earn above 26,575 up to £30,000 a year, which is 3,425. And then it's based on 9% of that figure divided into 12 monthly repayments, which in the £30,000 a year example works out at £25 a month. Okay, so hopefully this is reassuring for some of you that maybe the repayments are not as big as you maybe thought they were. So again, it's just worth kind of thinking about. Martin Lewis, the money saving expert, does a lot of really helpful guidance on the student loan. So if you want to watch even more videos or read more blogs on this topic, you can absolutely do that, because again, he helps to kind of explain what I'm talking about today, that maybe things kind of aren't as scary as they maybe are portrayed to be when it comes to the student loan. At the moment, the repayment period lasts for 30 years. And after that, the remainder of the loan is wiped, even if you haven't paid back all of your loan. The way that I see it, and I am somebody who has a student loan and makes a repayment every month, is I see it as a graduate tax. It's a small contribution that I pay each month in order to be in a graduate level job, which is what I'm in. You can only do my job if you have a degree. And on average, you're likely to earn more if you have a degree than if you don't. And therefore, I had a higher starting salary because I had a degree. overall, I will earn more in my lifetime on average because I have a degree. And so that's kind of why I see it as something, it's a small contribution I make. Now, you have to decide how you feel about that. Obviously, it's your loan and it's super important that you figure out how you personally feel about it. But that is kind of how I personally see it as someone who also pays back a student loan. Okay, so hopefully that's useful in terms of talking specifically about the repayments. Now let's have a look at the interest. So there is interest charged on the loan, and the interest amount varies depending on the point of the repayment period you're in, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The interest is based on something called RPI, which is Retail Price Index. And RPI affects lots of things. So it affects things like phone bills, for example. So if RPI goes up, my phone bill goes up. If RPI goes down, my phone bill will go down. So it is linked very much to that. I'm not going to, again, talk about this in huge amounts of detail, but I have included a link to Money Saving Expert. As somebody who has a student loan that I pay back each month myself, and not to kind of, pardon the pun, but I am not personally interested in the interest of my own loan. Like, I know it's there and it will make my loan bigger because interest is going to go on the loan throughout my repayment period. But the amount that I personally repay every month is based on my salary and not how big that loan is or the interest that's on it. So that's how I personally see it. There may be some of you who need to look into this more related to religious reasons in particular. And so that's something that you will kind of need to look into and potentially need to kind of consider in terms of what that means for you. Let me give you an idea of how much the interest is. So while you are studying, remember, you're not making any repayments then because you're focused on your studies, but there is interest charged on the loan during that time. And it is at the maximum, which is RPI plus 3%. So there will be a letter that you get when you graduate, which will say, this is what you borrowed for tuition fee loan. This is what you borrowed for maintenance loan. And then here's the interest. So this is kind of the total that your loan is. When your income is below the threshold, interest is still charged, but it's set at RPI only. And then the interest will go up again at various points when your income is between 26,575 and 47,835. And then when it gets to 47,835, it goes back to the maximum, which is RPI plus 3%. Again, there's a lot of information on the Student Finance website about this, so you can have a look. There's also information on Money Saving Expert. But remember that the interest does not affect how much you repay because your repayments are based on your salary and not how big your loan is. So I just want to give a little bit of context in terms of what this means for you on a practical level in terms of how these repayments are taken. This is an example of a wage slip. And for those of you that plan to be employed when you finish your degree, what will happen is the student loan repayment will be taken before you receive your actual pay. So it happens as part of a tax. You pay your tax, you pay your national insurance, that comes out of your salary before you receive it. The student loan works that way as well because it's linked to your national insurance number. Those of you who plan to be self-employed, you will do the student loan repayments through your self-assessment tax return. Okay, so my last few slides are linked to things around managing your money and kind of my few tips of things that I wish I had known back when I was at university. So my first recommendation would be buy some kind of rail card if you can, 16 to 25 or a 26 to 30. As a student, even if you're not in the age bracket, then you are usually still entitled to some kind of rail card. So it's definitely worth looking into that. A rail card saves you a third off all train travel, including in peak time. So those of you that are going to be going outside of London, they are really beneficial. I went to a university that was 5 hours away from home. I saved so much money by having a rail card. Those of you planning to stay in London, there are things like 18 plus oysters, student bus cards, all that kind of stuff. So do make sure that you make the most of those discounts. Any of you that are going to university where you will be driving, please make sure that you double check firstly whether the university allows you to take a car. So for example, where I work at City, we have no parking as we're in central London. So you wouldn't be able to take a car and you probably wouldn't choose to. But those of you that are going to a university that, is further away and you are planning to drive, just make sure you look up whether there is parking spaces, if they charge for that, if that makes sense as opposed to traveling by public transport. So just do your research into that. I would recommend that you create a budget and stick to it. There are loads of really helpful tools online to help you with budgeting. The Barclays website has some support with this. You may also use a bank account like Monzo or something like that, which supports you with kind of budgeting tools, but there are lots of ways to do it. And remember that you can work part-time alongside your degree. So your loan is going to come in 3 installments once per term, but your part-time job may pay you weekly, monthly, by shift. So that might be some income that kind of tops you up on a more frequent basis. So that's something to have a think about. Obviously, some of you may also be entitled to some benefits, and it might be that those would come in at different times as well. So you just want to make sure that you've got a real oversight of what money is coming into your account and when. Do have a think about whether funding is available from anywhere else. It isn't the case for anybody, but things like family support, scholarships in the community, not just from universities, but obviously do have a look at the university scholarships as well. To be honest, my best tip, and this is what I did in my third year, and I really wish that I had done this from the beginning of my degree, was to have 2 bank accounts. So have one bank account, which your student loan goes into. And remember, it's going in by term. So divide the number, that amount that went into your bank account by the number of weeks that it needs to last for. So let's say it needs to last for 12 weeks. And then have that set up as a weekly installment into your main bank account that you use every day. That's what I did in my final year. It forced me to budget because I only had a certain amount in the bank account that I used every day. And it just made things so much easier for me. So that really would be my personal tip to you. Obviously, different things work for different people. And this was before the days of stuff like Monzo, but I would recommend that you maybe have a think about that. I would also recommend that those of you that are in a position to do so, if you can put some money away over the summer of the year before you start university, which for many of you is this year, I would recommend that you try and do that if you can. When you start university, you have something called Freshers Week, which is the week of events, and you meet loads of new people, and there's lots of events to go to in order to do that. But that does cost money. Your loan will probably not be in time because you haven't like officially finalized your registration. So your loan will come in a few days later. Or if it is in, you don't really want to blow it all in Freshers Week. So I would really recommend that where you can, you have some money set aside for that period of time so that you can kind of start your loan fresh from kind of the more official first week of term, so that you can better manage your income in your first term, because the first term is the hardest, particularly for those of you who maybe haven't had money to budget up to this point. I also want to, before we finish, talk about student bank accounts. So student bank accounts are specific to students who are at university, and they have 0% interest-free overdrafts. So what that means is if you go into minus money, there are no fees or charges that happen while you're in minus money. For some of you, these will be incredibly beneficial. I think particularly for those of you who don't get enough maintenance loan, so maybe you're towards the bottom of that table that I showed a few slides ago. If you don't get enough to cover your accommodation or your rent, then it might be that you need to use a student bank account to help you, particularly when that money goes out. So particularly for accommodation, if that's going out per term, you might need the student bank account so that you can go into minus money, and then your part-time job would pay yourself back up to 0. This is the times where I think this bank account might be useful. Lots of banks will offer different options for student bank accounts. So some might have an overdraft that is just like minus 200 and you have to ask to have it extended. Some might let you go to minus 2,000 straight away. Some might have a different scheme. So every bank is different. Make sure that you do your research. Some of them may offer incentives for you to join. So for example, a free rail card is the most common one that banks will offer. So that could be something that you want to consider. You might just want to stay with your current bank and just have it turned into a student bank account. So again, I know I mentioned him a lot, but Martin Lewis is really helpful with this because every summer he does a comparison of all the student bank accounts and he recommends like what he thinks based on your circumstances who you should go for. So I would recommend having a look at that because you don't need to sort this before the summer, before you go to university. I do want to make sure that I kind of say to you to make sure you look at the fine print when it comes to student bank accounts, because what many of them will do is at the kind of day that you graduate, it will then say, great, you've graduated. Whether you've got a salary or not is not necessarily the point. We want you to start paying back your overdraft, and here's the charges that we're going to have while you're in minus money. So you do need to be careful of things like that. You may want to look for banks. So I was with Barclays, but bear in mind, I did graduate like 7 years ago, but I was with Barclays. And when I graduated, they rolled me over into a graduate account. And so I actually had another 3 years to pay off my overdraft if I had been in my overdraft, which I wasn't. But if I had been, it gave me 3 more years of 0% interest free. I would also recommend that you are savvy with it if you're going to have it. So try not to graduate in minus money. Try and only use it when you really need to. And I really recommend if you are someone who is using a student bank account that you have some kind of part-time job if you can manage it, because you want to be paying yourself in income from that, which means that you can get back into positive money rather than staying in negative money. I did have a friend when I was at university who really didn't use her student bank account savvily at all. In fact, she like walked into Nationwide and asked them to extend her overdraft because she wanted a £400 Marc Jacobs handbag. That is not the purpose of the student bank account. And I really don't recommend you end up like that. She actually ended up with like a minus 3,000 overdraft when she graduated. She couldn't pay it back. There was fees that her bank were charging. And so she then needed her parents to pay off her overdraft, and then she paid them back on a different plan with no interest. Again, not everyone's parents are in a position to bail them out. So I would really recommend you really think about whether this is the right thing for you. But for some of you, it could be beneficial. Okay, so something to think about there. Just a few more things then before I finish. So I have put here FAQ for parents, but I actually think for many of you that are partners who are listening as well, these things are kind of also linked to that. So as I mentioned, to find out any more about the student loan, there is obviously the gov.uk website, but I really would recommend Martin Lewis. He has videos, he has websites, he has blogs that are helpful with this information. Those of you that are supporting an application, so that is parents and partners who are providing household income, the student loan is the student's loan. I know that seems silly, but it is. So they will be the person who is taking out the loan in their name. Your income is used, your income details are used for assessment and not to be a part of their loan. So that's something to be aware of. It doesn't mean that you should start making their repayments if they decide that they don't want to do that anymore. Students, if you decide to move abroad, you do have to let Student Finance England know, because they need to work with you to figure out how much money you need to repay when you're in that country. So do make sure you keep Student Finance updated on that while you're in the repayment period. Student loans work differently to a normal bank account. So they are to a normal bank loan, sorry. So they are unsecured government lending, which means that they work differently. They don't affect a mortgage application, though you do have to list them as committed expenditure, but it is an education loan. So it does work differently to a traditional bank loan, which is why the repayments are so different and based on your salary and not just a fixed amount that you pay back each month, regardless of what you earn. So hopefully, I think those are some typical questions that I would get asked at this point. So I can see that there have been a few questions in the chat, and a big thank you to Philippa, who I know has been like going away and answering those questions while doing that. So thank you so much, Philippa. If you have any other questions, can you write those in chat now? And I'll be happy to try and answer them if I can. I could see that quite a few people were asking about when the application form will open. We don't have the date. Philippa's absolutely right. It will just be March 2022. We have not yet had the official amount. I can see that Pat asked a question about where you specify the amount you want to borrow. The way that the application form will work is it will say tuition fee loan, what would you like to apply for? Maintenance loan, here's what you're eligible for, what would you like to apply for? So when you're doing the student finance application, be very careful, go through it in detail, but it really, really has been improved since I was a student. Like I know that it's so much better than when I was there. So it does support you as much as it can. You can also reach out to Student Finance at any point. So you can ring them. Their number is 0300 100 0607. You don't have to memorize that. Just Google it. It will be there. They will help you. There is also a parent partner support line as well. So those of you who are providing household income and details, then, they will be able to speak to you as well. But it does need to be on the phone because of how they do that. So as I said, if you have any other questions, please drop them in chat now. For those of you, I know quite a few of you have joined later in the session. The careers team at Candy they have recorded this session and it will be up on the Candy Careers site, so you will be able to access this and watch the whole thing back. So don't worry if you joined late. Nicola, the application deadline, it hasn't necessarily been announced yet, but it's usually the 21st or 22nd of May, but it will be announced in line with the opening date. Ed, is graduate taxation based upon gross income or gross income minus your student loan repayment? Based on your gross income. If my child doesn't apply for maintenance loan, would this disadvantage him? No, if he doesn't need it. So if he needs the money, then I would recommend that he does apply for it, because if you're applying for the tuition fee loan already, then you are already taking out the loan. And so adding on the maintenance loan to that, remember, it doesn't affect how much you repay. Obviously, you will be repaying for longer. But the amount that you repay each month is based on your salary and not how big the loan is. So I think that's an individual decision there for you and your son about whether he financially doesn't need it. But I think students commuting from home don't necessarily need it. You're welcome, Christina. Thank you. Ali, with regards to the maintenance loan, can you apply only once at the start or halfway if required? You can apply later if you decide you want to. Student finance, it may kind of depend whether you're then able to get the full amount, but you might possibly still be able to if you apply late. Philip has included a link there in chat for you guys as well. Tess, in assessing my income for my daughter's application, Tess, I hope you don't write. I'll try not to read this out loud, actually, because I think it's quite individual to you. Okay, so Tess's question kind of links to something I said earlier, so I will try and reiterate that point just in case you missed it, Tess. So when you are supporting an application, you have to give the details on your most complete tax year's information, which will be April 2021. So it will be your March wage slip or your P60. If your income has changed since then, after you've applied using that information, you put in a new form, which is called a current year reassessment form, which will then reassess you on your current income details. But you have to have put in the previous complete tax year before that. So hopefully that answers your question. Barbara's question is, do I need to give my income details if I only apply for the tuition fee loan? So the first thing to say, Barbara, is your income details may never be asked for as part of this because it's based on people around you and not based on you. And I think there was some chat earlier on about you live alone, so it might be that actually you'll just get the full amount because they're not really basing it on anyone's income. If you only apply for the tuition fee loan, you will not be asked for any household income. So but I think this is a really good point to make for everybody, that if you are only applying for the tuition fee loan, or you are only applying for the minimum amount of maintenance loan that you are entitled to, the bit that is not based on household income that everybody gets, you will not need to put household income anywhere. You only put household income if you're trying to access the higher amount of maintenance loan. That's okay, Georgia, thank you. Okay, I think I've got to the end of the questions there. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions there. If you do have any others, we've still got about 4 minutes. So if you want to type those in chat, you're more than welcome to.
And just to say, everybody, I've put the link directly to the Candy webpage, to the YouTube page. We have loads and loads of interesting things to watch there. So I will hopefully get this up by the end of the week. So you can review it and watch it as many times as you want. And it's really helpful to have the verbal explanation that goes along with the slides so that it makes sense. But as I said, there's lots of other interesting things there as well, but I really encourage you and your children to watch.
All right, so I just want to say thank you very much for everything and good day.
Brilliant. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Ali's asked a question here. If my child cannot complete uni for any reason, what happens then? This is a very good question, Ali. So if your student, this is how things are as it stands at the moment anyway, if your student drops out in their first year before December, then they will likely only be charged for the first term of there is a certain cut-off date at some point in like November, December time. They will then only be paying back the first term. If they go longer than that, but they drop out, so let's say they dropped out in January, they will probably need to pay back the full year of tuition fee and maintenance that they borrowed. So that's something to bear in mind. If they restart university, they would hopefully, if their next degree is also a 3-year degree, be eligible for finance. Typically, Student Finance England does have a kind of grace year for each student. And so that means that, if a student does, make a mistake and they go to a university that's not right for them and then starts again, they should be hopefully eligible for the full loan then for their 3-year degree. However, if that degree was, say, a 4-year degree, or maybe they use 2 years of funding on their first degree, then they drop out, then they start again, and the next degree is 3 years, there is a year they will need to self-fund. So that is something to just bear in mind. And it often is the case that they will have to pay the first year for themselves up front, and then they would get the loan for the future years. It is a bit individual based on people's circumstances, but I hope that helps, Ali. Pat, this presentation, like the slides and everything, will be as part of the recording with my voice. So you'll be able to watch it back with me narrating over everything. So hopefully that helps.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just going to stop the recording now. And thank